If I had to swim a river or climb a mountain tall.
Even if you don't know the name Ben E. King, I guarantee you know and could probably even sing along with his most famous song. This video is a look at the music and career of one of R&B's all-time greats, who came from North Carolina. He was born Benjamin Earl Nelson about an hour north of Raleigh, in Henderson, in 1938. His family moved to Harlem, New York when he was 9. He grew up singing in church choirs, and as a teenager he formed a doo-wop group called the 4 Bs. Some of his early gigs included performances at the famed Apollo Theater. In 1958, a still very young Ben Nelson joined another doo-wop group, the 5 Crowns. Later that year, he got the chance of a lifetime to front one of the top singing acts of the day, the Drifters. The Drifters, true to their name, always consisted of members who were coming and going. There were, at various times, competing lineups of the group, and by some accounts, there have been at least 60 individual members over the decades. But the Drifters, who were originally the backing band of the legendary Clyde McPhatter, have had 3 main lineups that are considered their best. McPhatter fronted the group's first great iteration, although this only lasted 1 year. Ben E. Nelson would become the leader of the second iteration, what would later be considered by many as the golden era of the Drifters. In 1958, the group's manager, George Treadwell, who had bought the Drifters' name off of Clyde McPhatter, fired all 5 members. He still had the rights to the group for 1 year, along with lots of gigs on the books, so he assembled a new group, with Ben Nelson leading, and sent them on the road. Stepping into their predecessor's shoes was not so easy, however, and the group often played in front of hostile audiences. Treadwell brought in heavyweight producers Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller, who had been successful with another great doo-wop act, the Coasters. In 1959, this new team broke ground with one of their first singles, which happened to be the first commercial rock and roll recording to feature a string orchestra. There Goes My Baby was a top 10 hit on the Billboard charts, and it would later make Rolling Stone's list of 500 greatest songs of all time at number 193. This was in no small part because of the soulful voice of Ben E. Nelson. The Drifters would follow up with a string of classics, including Dance With Me.
Dance with me, oh, hold me closer, closer and closer, much closer.
This Magic Moment.
This magic moment, so different and so new, was like any other, until I kiss you.
And Save the Last Dance for Me.
You home and in whose arms you're gonna be. So darling, save the last dance for me.
Which would hit number 1 on the US charts and number 2 in the UK. This golden era of the Drifters was only to last 2 years. Ben Nelson was already beginning to think about a solo career and started using the stage name Ben E. King. When he asked his manager Treadwell for a raise in 1960, he was turned down.
Sweeter than wine, softer than the summer night. Everything I want, I have. Whenever I hold you tight, this magic.
King left the Drifters but decided to stay with their record label, Atlantic, and in 1961 would record a song written by his producer Jerry Lieber and Phil Spector, Spanish Harlem.
There is a rose in Spanish Harlem.
Spanish Harlem would chart higher on the pop charts than it did on the R&B charts. With several memorable songs under his belt already, young Ben E. King was just getting started. He had been working on a tune that had been intended for the Drifters. After the Spanish Harlem recording session, King still had some time booked in the studio. Lieber and Stoller asked him if he had any other songs, and King said he had words and some music for one, which he played for them on the piano. It's a song so famous, you'll probably know it just by hearing this. Stand By Me, which King co-wrote with Lieber and Stoller, is considered his masterpiece.
When the night has come and the land is dark and the moon is the only light we'll see,
nobody can sing it quite like him.
be afraid, oh I won't be afraid. Just
It would land number 1 on the R&B charts and number 4 on the pop charts.
stand by me. So darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me.
But Ben E. King wasn't finished yet, however. He continued to release hits that would make the charts, such as Don't Play That Song, You Lied,
Don't play that song for me. It brings back memories of days.
Young Boy Blues,
Each night is like 1,000 years. Oh, I can't lose these young boy blues.
and I Who Have Nothing.
I who have nothing. I who am no one.
He would remain on the charts throughout the 1960s.
And want you so.
And even though the British invasion bands were dominating in the latter half of the 60s, Ben E. King managed to remain relevant and popular.
And as he joins us to do his latest single on Atlantic entitled Supernatural Thing, let's get it together, gang, for one of the all-time greats of the music world, Mr. Benny King.
He even returned to the pop charts in the 1970s with his hit single Supernatural Thing, proving that he had some funk chops as well.
Your love, supernatural thing. Your love, supernatural thing. Oh, baby.
So this kid from North Carolina, whose name many people probably don't know, sang some of the most memorable songs from the middle of the 20th century. His voice is unmistakable, always sounding powerful and yet just about to crack from emotion.
I have counted every day since you've been away. It seems like 1,000 years. And at late at night, late at night, I sit and count the tears.
Stand By Me is so indelible, so electrifying, that it had the distinction of returning to the pop charts 25 years later in a number 9 spot. It reached this distinction with a little help from a certain film by the same name, one that featured a young cast of soon-to-be household names including River Phoenix, Corey Feldman, Will Wheaton, Kiefer Sutherland, and John Cusack.
And darling, stand by me.
It was based on a short story written by another king, Stephen. The 1986 reissue of the song also earned King the distinction of having top 10 hits for 4 consecutive decades, from the 1950s through the 1980s. He could be a one-hit wonder with Stand By Me alone and still deserve his place in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which he was inducted to, though as part of the Drifters, in 1988 by Billy Joel. And although Stand By Me was one of his solo recordings, it is credited by the Hall of Fame as one of the 500 songs that shaped rock and roll. King's influence is pretty unmistakable too. There are too many notable achievements to mention, but here are a few. He performed Stand By Me at a tribute to the late comedian George Carlin, who was a huge fan of his. He has been covered by no less than Dusty Springfield, Shirley Bassey, Tom Jones, Ray Charles, Aretha Franklin, Otis Redding, John Lennon, Lou Reed, Led Zeppelin, Susie and the Banshees, and even Florence and the Machine. His tune, I Who Have Nothing, is featured on The Sopranos' Peppers and Eggs soundtrack. Ben E. King was also inducted into the North Carolina Music Hall of Fame in 2009.
I want to know.
A hard-working mural painter, Scott Nurkin, has been documenting famous North Carolina musicians on the sides of buildings around the state since 2020. His portrait of Ben E. King stands in downtown Henderson as a tribute to the singer's roots.
What is soul? What a question, Mr. Ben E. King!
What are your memories of Ben E. King and his music?
What is soul, babe?
Make sure to leave a comment below, and if you enjoyed this look back on his life and his legacy, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about great North Carolina artists. Thanks.
It's